Hi everyone, welcome to Salesforce Topics channel. In this video, we will discuss an important Salesforce topic, that is order of execution. What is order of execution? For every insert or update DML, Salesforce internally execute a series of particular steps in a particular order. Let's take two examples, that is one with insert DML and another one is with update DML. For the insert DML, let's assume we have a object called service underscore request with a columns ID name. To insert a record into this table, we can go either with a standard UI page like this by entering the data over here like this. Here I have entered a name as Vijay Score and some other data over here. Or also we can insert the data using the Apex or SOAP APIs. So execution of insert DML can happen either via Apex or SOAP API or by clicking on the save button in the standard UI page. Once we click on save button, Salesforce internally executes a series of steps in a particular sequence. These series of steps which are executed by Salesforce at the background to insert this data into the DB are called as order of execution. Same way, let's take an example of update DML. Here also we have a same table with already existing data, that is a record with a name called Vijay's vehicle. We can update this row using the standard UI page like this by entering the updated data. Here I am updating a name from Vijay's vehicle to Vijay's car. Or we can also update this data using the Apex or SOAP API, etc. Once we click on the save button, in order to update this data into the database, Salesforce internally performs a series of steps in a particular order. These series of steps which are executed by Salesforce in a particular order are called as an order of execution. In order to easily remember all these steps involved in the Salesforce order of execution, I have divided these series of steps into three colors as red, yellow, and green, as we can treat these steps into three categories. First is before save activities in red color, after that a save, and then followed by a after save activities, after that commit, which is followed by post commit activities. Let's deep dive what are all these steps and why I chose these colors and categorization. First, we will look into the before save activities. Generally, it is always better to validate the inputted data and then only allow the sanitized data to store into the database. So Salesforce placed all the data input and sanitization steps first. These data input and data validation steps are: initialize record data from the DB, load record data from the input, before save triggered flows, before Apex triggers, validations, duplicate rules. For now, just remember the categorization why we divided like this. In the coming slide, we will take each step separately and see how that step gets executed as part of the order of execution in Salesforce. All these steps are meant for the data input, data validations, and sanitization of the data before saving it to the database. I gave red color to these 6 steps since these steps can stop the transaction in case of invalid data. Then we have a save step where Salesforce saves this collected, validated, and sanitized data into the DB, but it does not commit to the DB, it only saves it. So this updated data only visible to within this transaction. For other users or other transactions, still they will be able to see the old data. This updated data with the name Vijay's car is only visible to within this transaction. By this step, Salesforce has sanitized record data handy in the database. So now next is the good place to execute the Salesforce automation tools. Hence, next is list of after save activities to execute the list of Salesforce tools in this order. After Apex trigger, assignment rules, auto response rules, workflow rules, escalation rules, automation process builder, after save triggered flows, entitlement rules, updating parent record, updating grandparent record, criteria based sharing rules, all these steps comes under after save activities. Please note that there is a chance of failure during the execution of Salesforce automations because of various reasons. Hence, this is the perfect place that Salesforce selected the execution of automation tools before the data is actually committed to the database. After performing all these activities, Salesforce does the commit step. During this commit step, Salesforce makes it visible to all, which means this updated data now visible to other transactions too. At the commit step, the earlier saved data is made available to all others and other transactions. After commit steps, Salesforce performs the post-commit activities like sending an email. As part of post-commit activities, Salesforce can execute sending of an email, executing enqueued future jobs, etc. Now, let's see how each step gets executed in the order of execution. The very first step is initialize record data from the database. Let's see what does Salesforce do as part of this step for the insert DML and update DML. First, we will see in case of insert DML, what does Salesforce do as part of this first step. On click of save, it actually loads the data from the database. But here, as it is an insert, we do not have the record data yet in the database, so it will initialize with empty data. Since it does not have any data in the DB, it just initialized with an empty record for the insert as part of the first step. Similarly, let's see for the update DML. Even for the update DML, as part of the first step, Salesforce tries to load the data from the database and initialize the record. In this update case, we have a data in the database, that is a record with a name Vijay's vehicle. Since the first step is responsible to load the data from the database, it loads the data from the database and initializes that record. Here observe that name is initialized with Vijay's vehicle, which is there in the database. Please observe, here we are trying to update the name from the Vijay's vehicle to Vijay's car. Since the first step is responsible to load the data from the database, it just loaded the data from the database. For example, here name equal to Vijay's vehicle is loaded from the database. That's it. The job of step 1 is done. Now steps 2 gets executed. The responsibility of this step 2 is to load or override the input data into the record. Let's explore what does Salesforce do as part of this step 2 for insert and update DMLs. First, let's take the insert DML example. As part of step 2, Salesforce tries to override the input data into the record which was initialized in step 1. So here user has entered the data over here. So these data gets overridden to the record which was loaded from the database in earlier step. On click of save, as part of step 2, it overrides the input data into the record which was initialized earlier in the step 1. Observe that here it has overridden the name from the input data, that is Vijay's car. Similarly, let's see the update DML example. Here we are updating the name of this record from Vijay's vehicle to Vijay's car. Once we click on save, as part of step 2, Salesforce loads the data and overwrites the inputted data into the record which was initialized in earlier step. Here, as part of the first step, the name was Vijay's vehicle which was loaded from the database as part of first step, and now as part of second step it overridden the name with Vijay's car which was input from the user. Also, please note that as part of this second step, Salesforce performs the system validations. The system validations are the required values at page layout level. If there is any required values that we set up at the page layout level, that validation is popped up at the step 2 itself. Required values at field level definition. That means if we have defined any field as required at the field level itself, then that validation also would be performed as part of this step 2 only. Then valid field format and maximum field length. This valid field format and maximum field length validation is specific to Apex or SOAP because anyway standard UI edit page layout handles them client side itself. That means the field formats and maximum field length validations pops up at the page layout itself. And validate the foreign keys and restricted pick list. This is also specific to Apex or SOAP because the page layout anyway accepts only the correct foreign keys and correct restricted pick list values. But whereas in Apex there is a chance that we can assign wrong foreign keys for the lookup fields or master lookup fields. And there is a chance that we may assign wrong pick list values for the restricted pick list. That's it. The job of step 2 is done. Now the steps comes into the picture in the order of execution. The main responsibility of this step 3 is Salesforce looks for the before save triggered flows if exist for the current records object and executes those before save triggered flows. In this case, we have a before save trigger flow for our custom object, that is service request, for the created case or updated case. This before save trigger flow will just add bill amount with a 10 value. So in case of insert DML, as part of step 3, what Salesforce does is it identifies there is a before save triggered flow for this current records object and it executes that flow. Hence, as part of this step 3, we can see this bill amount gets added with 10. Here observe that as part of this step 3, the bill amount gets added by 10 because of the before save triggered flow that we have here. Same way in case of update DML, once user clicks on save button as part of this step 3, Salesforce identifies there is a before save triggered flow and it executes that before save triggered flow, and because of that we can see the bill amount get added with 10. Please note that in our case we have defined before save trigger flow for the service request object for the created record or updated record. Hence it executed that flow. If there is any validation errors occurred in this before save triggered flow, it stops the order of execution at this step itself. If there is no validation errors, then it will continue to the next steps. Please note that if there is no before save triggered flows, then Salesforce simply ignores this step 3 and it continues to the next step, that is step 4. Let's see what does Salesforce do as part of the step 4, that is execute before Apex triggers. The main responsibility of this step is it checks whether there is a logic for the before Apex trigger events, then those logic gets executed as part of this step 4. For example, in case of insert DML, on click of save, as part of this step 4, it looks for the before insert event logic, and if it finds the before insert logic, then it gets executed. Similarly, in case of the update DML, once user clicks on the save button as part of this step 4, it tries to identify the before update event logic and it executes the before update event logic if it finds for that object. Please note that if there is any validation errors that we have identified over here before insert or before update event logic, then it stops the further order of execution here at this step itself. If there are no validation errors occurred, then it continues to the next step, that is step 5, which is a system validations again. If we remember at step 2, Salesforce has already performed a set of system validations, but there is a chance that in the before save trigger flows or execute before Apex trigger, that user might have changed the current records data. As there is a chance of data change in the previous 2 steps, the Salesforce has to perform the system validations again. Let's see in case of insert and update what kind of system validations performed again. For the case of insert, on click of save, as part of the step number 5, the Salesforce performs the system validations again, but here the first system validation that is specific to the standard UI edit page layout cannot be performed here because we already reached to the step 5 and this first system validation is specific to the client side page layout validation. And Salesforce performs these remaining 3 system validations, that is required values at field level definition, valid field formats and maximum field length validation, validates the foreign keys and restricted pick list. Also please note that as part of step 5, Salesforce also performs the custom validations. If we would have defined this custom validations at the current records object. In this example, we have defined one validation rule for the service request object. So this custom validation rule gets executed as part of this step 5. Similarly, in the case of update DML, as part of this step 5, the system validations performs again and the custom validation rules also gets executed. If there are any validation failures over here at this step, then Salesforce stops the execution of order at this step itself. If there are no validation errors identified, then it proceeds to the next step, that is duplicate rules verification. The primary responsibility of this step 6 is Salesforce tries to check whether there is a duplicate rules defined for the current records object, and if it identifies, it executes that duplicate rules as part of this step. For the service request, we have one duplicate rules defined. So in the case of insert DML, when user clicks on the save button as part of this step 6, it tries to execute this duplicate rule. And if it identifies any error over here, it stops the order of execution at this step itself. Similarly, in case of update DML, once user clicks on save button as part of this step 6, it tries to identify the duplicate rule, and if it identified the duplicate rule, then it executes that duplicate rule. In case if it identifies any duplicate rule validations error, then it stops the order of execution at this step itself. If in case there is no validation error on this rule, then it will continue to the next step. Note that since we have defined the duplicate rule for this object, it has identified and it executed over here. If we would have not defined any duplicate rules for the current records object, then it simply ignores this step and it continues to the next step. If you observe, all these 6 steps are meant for the input data, validation of the data, and sanitization of the data. And the data is not yet saved into the database. So it is always better to perform all the validations and stop the transaction within these 6 steps itself. Hence I mark these steps as red because this is the correct place to stop in case of any invalid data. The next step is just save, does not commit. Let's see how this step would be performed in case of insert DML and update DML. First, let us see the insert DML statement. Here, once user clicks on save, it has to insert this data into the DB. So, when we click on save, once after step 6, this step 7 takes place. As part of this step 7, Salesforce takes this input sanitized and validated data by the previous steps and just saves that data into the database. But this is not visible to the other transactions. This saved data is only visible within the current transaction. Same way, let's see the update DML execution. In the update DML, let's observe that in the database we have the data like this with Vijay's vehicle, but in the input we are updating the name like Vijay's car. Once we click on save button, it performs all the steps from 1st to 6th and then it goes to the 7th step. As part of this step 7, Salesforce takes this inputted, validated and sanitized data by the previous steps and saves into the DB, but this data, whichever updated, will be only visible within this transaction. At this point of time, others or other transactions would be able to see the old data only. That is, the old data, the name was Vijay's vehicle. This modified content, that is name with a Vijay's car, would be visible to only within this transaction. The next step is execute after apex triggers. The responsibility of this step is Salesforce checks for the after apex triggers, and if it identifies after apex triggers, then the logic mentioned under the after apex events gets executed. Let's see, in case of insert DML, on click of save, we have the step 8 after the step 7. Since it is an insert DML, as part of step 8, it checks for the after insert event, and if there is a logic for the after insert event, that logic gets executed. In this case, our service request has the trigger and we have logic for the after insert event for the service request object. Hence it executes the logic mentioned in the after insert event. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save, after performing the steps till 7th, the 8th step gets executed and it checks for the after update event, and since it finds the logic over here, it executes the logic mentioned under after update event. After performing the step 8, it moves to the step 9, that is assignment rules. As part of this step, Salesforce looks for the assignment rules. Of course, assignment rules exist for the leads and case. In the case of lead update or lead insert or case update or case insert, this step is very valuable, or our logic is ultimately making the updates to lead or case. In that case, this assignment rules gets executed. Let's see for the insert DML. In our case, on click of save, it will execute the steps from 1 to 8, and then it moves to the step 9, and over here it checks for the assignment rules. But here our insert statement is for service request, so it doesn't find any assignment rule, so it will just move to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML also, it will try to see the assignment rules are exist or not as part of this step 9, and if it identifies assignment rules, it executes that assignment rule. Otherwise, it will just skips to the next step, that is step number 10, auto response rules. As part of this step, Salesforce looks for the web to lead auto response rule or case auto response rules. Similar to earlier step, this step also related to the lead or case object. Since our service request does not relate to any case or lead, these steps just get skipped and it will continue to the next step. Let's see what happens for the insert case DML in our case. Once user clicks on save button, it executes all the steps from 1 to 9. After performing step 9, it will move to the step 10, that is the current step, that is auto response rule step. At this step, it just checks for the auto response rules. Since we don't have any auto response rules for our insert DML, it will just skip to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML also, Salesforce checks for the auto response rules after performing the step 9. As part of this step 10, Salesforce checks for the auto response rules. Since we are updating the service request object, it doesn't find any auto response rule. It will just continue to the next step. That is step number 11, workflow rules and field updates. As part of this step, Salesforce tries to check if there is any workflow rules defined for the current records object, and if in case it identifies any workflow rule. For example, for our service request, we have a workflow rule defined in case of created or its updations. So let's see for the insert DML for the service request object. As part of step 11, the Salesforce tries to execute this workflow rule. Since service request has a workflow rule which is for created case and updated case, as part of step 11, it executes this workflow rule and then it moves to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML, once user clicks on save, it executes all the steps from 1 to 10, and then at the step number 11, it checks for the workflow rule and it identifies this workflow rule and it executes this workflow rule. Then it moves to the next step. In the workflow rules, there is a chance that the current records field updates can happen. For example, in this workflow rule, we are updating the service request free service field as true. As there is a field update on the current record over here, Salesforce has to repeat earlier steps again. But over here, it will not repeat all the steps again. It will execute only the specific steps. Like it does not repeat initial record data, load record new data. It doesn't execute before save triggered flows. It executes before Apex triggers, and it executes system validations again. As we know, as part of this step, we have the custom validations also. So it executes the custom validations also again. It doesn't execute the duplicate rules. It performs the save but does not commit it. It also executes after Apex triggers. It doesn't execute the assignment rules. It doesn't execute auto response rules. So if there is any field update on the current record during the workflow rules execution, the only steps that gets executed is 4. Execute before Apex trigger. 5. System validations again. 7. Just save, does not commit. And 8. Execute after Apex triggers. Then it moves to the step number 12, that is execute escalation rules. As part of this step, Salesforce looks for the escalation rules. Let's see, in our case for the insert DML, on click of save, it performs all the steps from first to 11, and then it moves to the 12, and over here it checks for the escalation rules. Since our service request object does not have any escalation rule or any relation with the case, it just checks here and it will skip to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML, once we click on the save or once we execute update DML, it will perform all the steps from the first to 11, and then it moves to 12. As part of this step 12, it checks for the escalation rule, but it doesn't find any escalation rule for our service request update. Hence, it moves to the next step, that is automation process builders. For this step, Salesforce checks for the if there are any process builders available for the current records object, and if it identifies that process builder, then it triggers that process builders. Let's see in our case for the insert DML, on click of save, order of execution starts and it starts from 1 and it will continue till the 12. Then it moves to the step number 13. As part of the step number 13, it checks for the process builder. For our service request, we have created one process builder, so it triggers that process builder. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save or on updating the SR in the Apex, the order of execution starts from 1 to till 12, and then it moves to the step number 13. At this step number 13, it identifies one process builder for our service request. Since it identifies the process builder for the service request, it triggers that process builder. Then the order of execution moves to the next step, that is step number 14, after save triggered flows. For this step, Salesforce checks for the after save triggered flows for the current records object. In our case, we have defined one after save triggered flow for our service request object. Now let's see for the insert DML how order of execution takes place. On click of save or on insert SR, the order of execution starts from step 1 and it completes till 13th and it moved to the 14th step. As part of the 14th step, it tries to see whether there is a after save triggered flow. In our case, we have after save triggered flow for the both created case or updated case. Hence, it executes that after save triggered flow. If it does not find any after save triggered flows, then it just skips this step and it moves to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save or on performing the update SR in the Apex, the order of execution starts and it continues from first to 13th step, then it moves to the 14th. As part of the 14th step, it checks for the after save triggered flows. Since we have after save triggered flows for the service request, even for the updated case, it executes that after save triggered flows. If it doesn't find any after save triggered flows, in that case it just move to the next step, that is the 15th step, entitlement rules. For this step 15, Salesforce checks for the entitlement processes. In our case, we don't have any entitlements rules for service request, and our service request does not relate to any case directly or indirectly. So it will just come to this step and it moves to the next step. So now let's see for our insert DML the order of execution. On click of save, the order of execution starts from 1 to till 14, and then it moved to the step number 15. As part of step number 15, it tries to check for the entitlement rules, but it doesn't find any entitlement rule for our service request. So it just moved to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save or on performing the update SR, the order of execution starts from step 1 to step number 14, and then it will move to the step number 15. At this step number 15, Salesforce tries to identify the entitlement rules, but it doesn't find any entitlement rule for our service request object. So it doesn't execute this entitlement rule. It will just move to the next step, that is updating of parent record. This updation of parent record happens whenever the current record has a parent and it has a roll-up summary field. For example, our service request has a master lookup field, that is account. Account is a parent for our service request object, and on the account we have roll-up summary field to identify the number of service requests. So on insert of service request or on update of service request, this roll-up summary field gets updated on the parent. That updation happens as part of this step 16 during the order of execution while inserting the service request or updating service request. Let's see for the insert DML of our service request. On click of save, as we know, order of execution starts and it continues from 1 to till 15th step. After performing the 15th step, it moves to the 16th step to update the parent record. In this case, it will identify there is a roll-up summary field on the parent, that is number of service request. So it has to update the parent record. Since account record is getting updated over here, the order of execution on the account record starts from step 1 to step 20. That means for this account record, all the steps from 1 to 20 gets executed as part of the same transaction. Once account records order of execution completed, then it comes back to the step 16 of the service request insert operation, and then it will continue to the step number 17. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save or on performing the update SR, it performs the order of execution from step 1 to step 15, then it moves to the step 16 to identify whether there is a roll-up summary field on its parent. Since it has a roll-up summary field over here on its parent, that is account, it will update that parent record. Since the updation is happening on the parent record, the order of execution starts for the parent record, and all the steps from first to 20 gets executed for the parent records also as part of this step 16 under this same transaction. Once all the steps from 1 to 20 completes for the parent record, it comes back to the 16th step of update operation, and then it moves to the next step, that is step number 17. Step number 17 is to update the grandparent record. For example, if our service request object has parent as account and account has parent as account again, then that account becomes as a grandparent. And if in case the grandparent has the roll-up summary field, in that case, As part of this 17, it has to update the grandparent record also. So let's see for our service request insert DML operation. On click of save or on performing the insert SR, order of execution starts from step 1 to till 16, and then it moves to the step number 17. On step number 17, it tries to identify if there is any grandparent record and if that grandparent has a roll-up summary field. If the grandparent has a roll-up summary field, it updates that record. And for that grandparent records update operation, the order of execution gets triggered. After completion of that order of execution from step number 1 to 20, it will come back to the step number 17 of the our service request insert operation, and then it moves to the next step, that is step number 18. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save, the order of execution starts from step 1, it continues to till 16, and then it moves to the step number 17 to see if there is any grandparent record available, and under that, if there is any roll-up summary field on the grandparent record, then it updates that grandparent record. And because the grandparent record is getting updated, for that grandparent records update, the order of execution again starts similar way, starts from the step 1 to step 20. After completion of that order of execution from step 1 to step 20 on the grandparent record under the same transactions, it comes back to the step number 17, and then it moves to the next step, that is step number 18, to execute the criteria based sharing rules. As part of this step, Salesforce checks if there is any criteria based sharing rules. In our case, we have defined one sharing rule, so it executes that sharing rule as part of the step number 18. Let's see for the insert DML. On click of save, the order of execution starts and it continues till 18th step, from step number 1 to 18th step. At 18th step, since it identifies one sharing rule, it executes that sharing rule and then it moves to the next step. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save, order of execution gets started from step 1 to till step number 17, and then it moves to the step number 18. As part of this step number 18, it identifies there is a sharing rule on the service request, so it will execute that sharing rule and then it moves to the next step, that is step number 19, committing to the DB. The actual commit of the record happens at the step number 19. Let us take an example of our service request insert DML. On click of save or on execution of the insert SR statement, the order of execution starts. Here it saved the data into the DB, but it is not yet committed. Then the yellow color category steps have been executed. Till this point of time, this data is just saved and it is not visible to others. At step number 19, this data gets committed and it will be visible to other users also. Similarly, in case of the update DML, on click of save or on performing the update SR statement, the order of execution gets starts and it will continue till the step 18. At step 7, it's saved, but the data is not visible to others. Till this point of time, this record is just saved and it is not visible to others. It is only visible within this transaction. At step number 19, it gets committed to the database, so it will be visible to everyone from now onwards. The 19th step, that commit step, will be collected into the queues and then at the end of the transaction only that 19th steps gets executed. For example, in this case, the order of execution gets executed for the insert service 1 statement till the step number 18, and then the 19th step gets queued. Similarly, while executing the insert service 2, the order of execution gets started and it will execute till the step numbers 18, and then the 19th step gets queued. Now, if our transaction is ended, that means if our code has been executed till the last line, that is till the transaction ending point, then at that point of time, this queued DMLs gets committed in the sequence whichever they are occurred in this transaction. For example, once it reaches to here, first this gets committed because it came first in the transaction, then this gets committed because it saved second, and so on. In our order of execution, the very last step is post commit activities. As part of this post commit activities, Salesforce performs the activities like sending an email, executing the enqueued Apex jobs like batch jobs, queuable jobs, and future jobs. And if there are any asynchronous paths in the record trigger flows, then those asynchronous paths also gets executed as part of this post commit activities. For example, in case of our insert DML, on click of save, here we are going to see the complete steps execution from step number 1 to step number 20. On click of save, the order of execution gets started from step number 1 to till 20. Now it has completed the first category steps, that is in red color. Then it moved to the second category of steps, that is in yellow color. Then it committed to the DB. After that, the green color step, that is step number 20 post commit activities, has been executed. That means at the step number 20, if it has to send any email, it will send, or if it has enqueued any Apex jobs, that jobs gets triggered. And if there are any asynchronous paths in the record trigger flows, that asynchronous paths gets executed. Similarly, for the update DML, on click of save or performing the update SR, the order of execution gets started and it completed the first category step, that is red steps. Then it saved into the DB. Then it started the steps mentioned in the second category, that is yellow steps. On step number 19, actual data gets committed and it will be visible to all. And then the post commit activities would be performed. Please note that this post commit activities also would get queued and it would get executed at the end of the transaction. Similar way like step number 19, commit to DB. Thank you for watching.